The awakening of a new era. In the heart of a hidden military base, far from the watchful eyes of the world, a team of the brightest minds from across the globe worked tirelessly. For years, they had been putting their lives into a project that no one knew about. It wasn't a secret project to develop the next military tank or fighter jet. It was something far greater, something that would change the course of history. Deep beneath the Earth's surface, a colossal ship, one like no other, was slowly being pieced together. The world had no idea that Earth's first Star Destroyer was in the making. Dr. Marcus Reynolds, the lead engineer, stared at the schematics for what felt like the 100th time. The numbers, calculations, and designs blurred together. He had given everything to this project: his time, his health, even his relationships. But today, the moment he had been waiting for had finally arrived. The first prototype of the Star Destroyer would soon be activated. The project had started as a dream of creating a weapon capable of protecting humanity against any threat that might come from beyond the stars. But it had quickly turned into something more. As the crew built the ship, they realized they were not just creating a military vessel. They were creating a symbol, a beacon of humanity's potential to stand tall in a universe full of unknown dangers. The base, called Project Vanguard, was tucked away in a remote area of the Antarctic Circle. The freezing temperatures outside were a stark contrast to the heat generated by the engines inside. The sound of heavy machinery echoed through the base as the final touches were being made to the Star Destroyer. Its metallic frame gleamed under the harsh white lights, and the hum of power systems coming online was the only noise that filled the air. The ship, towering above everything else, was a marvel of human engineering, a blend of ancient designs and futuristic technology. Outside, the world continued as normal, unaware of what was happening beneath the ice. Nations debated over politics, and ordinary citizens went about their daily lives. They had no idea that their lives were about to be changed forever. The Star Destroyer, still under wraps, held the key to their survival, and perhaps their destruction. The moment of truth arrived. As the countdown to activation began, the room fell silent. Everyone, from the engineers to the military commanders, held their breath. This was not just a test. It was the beginning of a new era. The Star Destroyer would either prove humanity's might or it would fail, and they would be left to face the consequences. Dr. Reynolds stood at the control panel, his fingers hovering over the activation switch. He looked over to his team, his eyes filled with a mix of anticipation and fear. "This is it," he muttered, pressing the button. The machine roared to life. For a moment, nothing happened. The ship remained silent, its massive form just sitting there, as if waiting. But then, slowly, lights flickered on along its hull. The ship's massive engines hummed with power, and the ground beneath their feet began to shake as the ship's systems powered up. It was a living, breathing thing now. The Star Destroyer was awake. Outside, the once quiet sky suddenly became alive with the roar of the ship's engines. The sound could be heard for miles around. The shockwave from the ship's activation rippled through the icy landscape, and in the distance, the first signs of a new world began to stir. The project that had begun in secrecy was now visible to the world. On the control deck, the crew watched as the ship's massive weapon systems activated, followed by the blinking of communication systems, as if the ship were trying to reach out. The sight was awe-inspiring, but also terrifying. No one knew what kind of power they had just unlocked. As the Star Destroyer stood tall and proud in its newfound power, the leaders of the world were unaware of the ship's true capabilities. News outlets reported strange activity coming from remote regions, but it was brushed off as a strange phenomenon. They had no idea that Earth's first Star Destroyer was not just a machine of war. It was a tool of survival. The ship's massive form, now fully awake, stood as a silent reminder of what humanity was capable of. And as its engines roared into the cold night, the world began to change in ways no one could predict. What had once been a distant dream of a weapon for protection had now become a reality. But was Earth ready for the responsibility that came with such power? Would they use it wisely, Or would they unleash a force beyond their control? Only time would tell. But for now, Earth had awoken its greatest weapon, and there was no turning back. As the days passed, the Star Destroyer remained under the control of its creators, who worked relentlessly to test its systems and fine-tune its massive power. The world, still oblivious to the ship's existence, continued in its chaotic yet normal routine. But there was a growing tension among those working at the base. They knew that once the world discovered what they had created, things would never be the same. Dr. Reynolds couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled over him. The Star Destroyer, while a marvel of engineering, was also a dangerous weapon, a tool that could either ensure humanity's survival or bring about its downfall. And deep in the dark corners of space, unseen by the naked eye, were forces that had been watching Earth for years. Forces that might not take kindly to the sudden emergence of such power. The project's true scope was known to only a few. The Star Destroyer was not just meant for defense. It was designed to be a beacon, a message to the universe that Earth was no longer a vulnerable planet hiding in the shadows. It was an announcement, and it would have consequences. Humanity's very presence in the galaxy was about to be tested. One evening, as Dr. Reynolds sat in his lab, reviewing the data collected from the latest tests, an encrypted message flashed on his screen. The message was strange, cryptic, and sent from an untraceable source. It read, "The galaxy is watching. You have awoken something that should have stayed asleep. Prepare for what comes next." His heart raced as he read the words again. The message didn't make sense. Who could have sent it? Who knew about the Star Destroyer? The project was top secret, hidden from even the highest levels of government. And yet someone knew. Someone knew what they had created. He immediately contacted the military commanders overseeing the project, but they were as puzzled as he was. No one had breached the security of the base, and all communication channels were tightly controlled. They decided to investigate the message further, but they knew that whatever was coming next, it wasn't going to be good. The unease spread like wildfire through the base. Everyone who had worked on the project now feared the consequences of their actions. What if they had made a grave mistake? What if the very power they had unleashed would bring them into conflict with beings far more advanced than humanity could ever imagine? But there was no turning back now. The Star Destroyer had been activated, and there was no way to hide it. The ship had begun to send signals into space, reaching out to unknown corners of the galaxy. The message of humanity's power was out there, and the universe would surely take notice. And then, as if answering the call, strange signals began to appear on the ship's communication system. At first, they were faint, barely noticeable. But soon, they grew stronger, more frequent. Dr. Reynolds and his team scrambled to decipher the messages, but they were written in a language no human had ever seen before. Ancient symbols that seemed to pulse with an eerie energy. Days later, after countless attempts to break the code, a new message appeared. It was simple, yet terrifying. "You are not alone." Dr. Reynolds' hands trembled as he read the message. He turned to his team, who had gathered around him, anxiously waiting for answers. "We need to prepare," he said, his voice shaking with uncertainty. "Something is coming. Something big." The world's leaders remained unaware of the growing threat. They still believed the Star Destroyer was nothing more than a piece of advanced military technology, a new weapon that could be used to secure their borders. They had no idea that what they had set in motion would soon draw the attention of alien civilizations, some of which might not be as friendly as humanity hoped. The moment the message reached Earth, it was too late to turn back. The universe had taken notice, and the Star Destroyer was now a target. As the ship continued to pulse with energy, sending waves of signals into deep space, a storm began to brew on the horizon. Humanity had awoken a force far greater than anything they had ever encountered, and it was coming for them. As the days passed, the atmosphere at the base became more tense. Dr. Reynolds and his team were no longer simply worried about the Star Destroyer's capabilities. They were terrified of what they had unknowingly awakened. The strange messages continued to appear, each more cryptic and ominous than the last. It was clear now. Earth was no longer hidden in the shadows of the galaxy. The first true sign of danger came one morning. The signals that had been slowly growing in strength suddenly surged. They were no longer faint whispers from deep space. They were clear, commanding, and unmistakable. The base's communication systems were overwhelmed by the incoming messages. Dr. Reynolds stood in the control room, staring at the large screen. It displayed a series of symbols that none of them could understand. The room was silent, every person on edge, waiting for someone to decode the alien text. But there was no time. A sudden tremor shook the entire base. It was unlike anything they had felt before. The ground vibrated, and the lights flickered. Panic spread quickly among the staff. "What is happening?" someone asked in a panic. Dr. Reynolds didn't have an answer. The tremors stopped as abruptly as they had started, leaving only an eerie calm. But it was a calm that did not comfort him. Something was out there, something powerful, and it wasn't friendly. Hours passed with no further signs of the alien fleet, no more tremors, no more strange signals, but the feeling of being watched lingered. The team continued to work around the clock, trying to decipher the alien messages. As time passed, it became clear that this was no ordinary communication. It wasn't a friendly warning or a casual request. It was a declaration. The Star Destroyer had made its presence known, and now the galaxy's most powerful beings had noticed. The first decoded message appeared on the screen in bold crimson text. "The galaxy is ours to control. You have awakened us. Prepare for the reckoning." Dr. Reynolds' stomach dropped. The words were chilling, filled with hostility. They weren't just a message. They were a warning. The power that had been unleashed by the Star Destroyer was far beyond what humanity could comprehend, and now the universe was taking notice. The message was clear. Humanity's time of peace was over. They had invited a war. The world's governments were quickly notified, but the news was met with disbelief. The general public, still unaware of the Star Destroyer, had no idea how serious the situation was. The media coverage was full of confusion, with speculations ranging from alien invasions to scientific experiments gone wrong. But for Dr. Reynolds and his team, there was no more doubt. This wasn't just about a weapon. It was about survival. "Who are they?" one of the scientists asked nervously as they stared at the decoded message. "They're older than we can imagine," Dr. Reynolds answered grimly. "Ancient civilizations that have seen more of the galaxy than we could ever dream. They were waiting for something, and we've just given them that something." The base erupted into chaos as they scrambled to formulate a plan. Should they abandon the Star Destroyer? Could they even destroy it now that it was active? The decisions they made in the coming hours would determine the fate of humanity. And then, as if to confirm their worst fears, another message appeared on the screen, clearer and more direct than any before. "The Destroyer is ours. Prepare for your reckoning, Earth." The finality in the words made it clear that the ship was no longer theirs to control. It was a beacon, signaling to the galaxy's most dangerous forces that Earth had drawn too much attention. The humans, who had once hoped to wield the Star Destroyer as a symbol of their strength, now realized they had created a beacon for their enemies. Dr. Reynolds felt a chill run down his spine. The only thing that could stop this now was humanity's ability to adapt and fight back. But was it too late? Had the galaxy already chosen its side? As the messages continued, the world held its breath. The Star Destroyer was no longer just a weapon. It was the spark that would ignite a conflict with forces beyond their comprehension. The countdown had begun. The days following the alien message were filled with unease. Earth's governments scrambled to respond, unsure of what action to take. Military forces were placed on high alert, but the true magnitude of the threat was still unclear. Dr. Reynolds and his team continued to study the Star Destroyer, trying desperately to find any way to shut it down, or at least understand what it had awakened. But the more they uncovered, the more they realized they were facing something far beyond their capabilities. The Star Destroyer, once a relic of a forgotten civilization, now pulsed with an eerie energy. Its hull seemed alive, as if it was waiting for something that was about to happen. The scientists discovered that the ship's systems were interconnected with the Galactic network, an ancient communication system that linked planets and star systems across the universe. This was no mere vessel. It was a signal, a beacon that had been dormant for millennia. The transmissions were not random. They were deliberate, calling out to something, or someone, out in the vast reaches of space. The team worked day and night, trying to trace the origin of these messages, but the signals were too complex, too ancient. They had no idea who or what they had awakened. Dr. Reynolds sat in the control room late one night, staring at the screen as another message appeared. "The destroyer is activated. Your time is running out." He felt the weight of those words sink deep into his chest. This wasn't just a threat, it was a promise. The alien forces had begun their approach. But how long did they have? Hours? Days? They had no way of knowing. "Do you think they'll come here?" one of the engineers asked, his voice trembling. "I don't know," Dr. Reynolds replied, his voice strained. "But they won't stop. We've triggered something we can't undo." The team was on edge. Some argued that they should shut down the Star Destroyer, even if it meant risking destroying everything. Others insisted that they had to keep it functional. It was their only hope of defending Earth. But every moment of indecision felt like a ticking time bomb. The military began to prepare for a defense, though the reality was clear. No weapons they had could match the power of the alien forces that were coming. The Star Destroyer was humanity's only chance, but it was also their greatest risk. What if they were playing into the hands of a far more powerful enemy? Dr. Reynolds couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Each time the team ventured into the Star Destroyer's control room, the air seemed heavier. The ship was no longer a mere machine. It was a sentient entity, aware of their presence. It seemed to hum with energy, as if it were alive, its massive power gathering with every passing minute. On the morning of the third day, the unease turned into terror. The entire base shook with a force so great that it sent shockwaves through the ground. It wasn't an earthquake. It wasn't a natural disaster. This was something far more sinister. Outside, the sky darkened as massive ships appeared in Earth's orbit. They were unlike anything humanity had ever seen, vast, incomprehensible structures that seemed to blot out the stars. Their presence filled the world with an overwhelming sense of dread. The ships did not communicate. They did not negotiate. They simply hovered in silence, waiting. "What are they?" one of the soldiers whispered, his voice shaky with fear. "They're the ones who were called," Dr. Reynolds muttered, his voice barely audible. "They're the ones who've been waiting for this moment." The alien ships did not move. They simply waited. Then, as if to confirm the worst fears of everyone on Earth, a final message flashed across every screen on the planet, cutting through every broadcast, every frequency. "We are here. Prepare for the end." The world went still. The reality of the situation sank in. The Star Destroyer, once a symbol of humanity's hope, had now become a beacon for Earth's destruction. But there was no turning back. The galaxy's most powerful forces had arrived, and Earth had no choice but to face them head-on. The countdown had ended. The storm was here. As the alien ships began to unleash their firepower, humanity's last line of defense, the Star Destroyer, lay dormant, awaiting activation. The team, led by Dr. Reynolds, had made their way to the hidden base where the ancient weapon was buried. They could feel the weight of the mission pressing down on them with every step, knowing that Earth's fate depended on their success. The base was located deep within a mountain range, shielded by ancient technologies that had kept it hidden for centuries. The walls of the underground facility were lined with massive metal doors, each one sealed tight as if the very ground itself had been protecting the weapon from the outside world. The team's nerves were on edge as they approached the control room, where the Star Destroyer's activation systems awaited their command. But no one knew if the technology would even respond after all these years. Would it work? Or would humanity's last hope become just another relic of the past? Inside the control room, they found a vast array of consoles and complex machinery, seemingly untouched by time, but just as confusing. Sarah, the brilliant engineer, was the first to approach the main console. She placed her hand on the interface, and a soft glow emanated from the panels. It was as if the Star Destroyer was waking up, sensing the presence of those who would try to control it. Dr. Reynolds held his breath. Could this be it? Could the ship's dormant power be unlocked? The engineers worked frantically, inputting commands into the system. The countdown had begun. The alien ships were already in orbit, their weapons charged and ready to strike. Every second counted. "Try it now," Dr. Reynolds said, his voice low and tense. "Activate the power grid. We need to find out if we can bring it online." Sarah hesitated for a moment before pressing the sequence of buttons required to activate the Star Destroyer's power core. At first, there was nothing. No hum, no flicker of light. But then, slowly, the lights in the room began to dim, and the monitors came to life. A low hum reverberated through the ground as the Star Destroyer's core began to charge. Is it working?" someone asked, disbelief in their voice. Before anyone could respond, the hum grew louder, the vibration increasing. A bright pulse of energy shot up from the ground, the power surge illuminating the base like 1,000 suns. It felt as though the world itself was holding its breath. Suddenly, the main view screen flickered on, revealing the Star Destroyer's massive form in orbit above Earth. The ship's dormant weaponry now hummed with potential, ready for action. The team watched in awe as the ancient weapon, long hidden away, came to life, its systems responding to human hands for the first time in centuries. Dr. Reynolds stood tall, his heart pounding in his chest. "We did it," he whispered. "The Star Destroyer is awake." But their success came at a price. The alien ships above had been watching, waiting. The moment the Star Destroyer powered up, the first blast was fired. A massive beam of energy shot toward the ground, hitting Earth's surface with a terrifying explosion. The shockwave shook the base, rattling everyone inside. "Move! We need to get out of here now," Dr. Reynolds shouted, his voice filled with urgency. The alien forces had already begun their assault, and there was no time to waste. The team raced toward the emergency exit, but the ground was shaking violently. They had only moments to reach the surface before the full force of the alien invasion descended upon them. As they emerged from the base, they saw the alien ships opening fire, destruction raining down from the sky. The Star Destroyer, now fully awake, was the only chance they had. It was the planet's only hope of surviving this invasion. Dr. Reynolds had no choice but to trust the ship's systems to perform as expected, even though they had never been tested before. The alien fleet continued to fire upon Earth, but the Star Destroyer, now in orbit, powered its weapons and locked onto the invaders. For the first time, the alien ships began to feel the full force of humanity's new weapon. It was not a perfect system, but it was the only one they had. The battle for Earth was about to begin, and the fate of humanity rested on the shoulders of those who had just activated a weapon older than any civilization in the galaxy. Dr. Reynolds and his team watched from the surface as the Star Destroyer unleashed its fury on the alien invaders. The weaponry was powerful, but would it be enough? The answer, they knew, was still uncertain. But for the first time, humanity was fighting back, using the power of the past to battle the forces of the future. The first wave of alien ships began to falter as the Star Destroyer's weapons tore through their defenses. It wasn't a guaranteed victory, but for the first time, humanity had a fighting chance. The Star Destroyer wasn't just a weapon. It was a symbol of the human spirit, the strength to survive, no matter the odds, was embedded within this ancient machine. Humanity had awoken it, and now it was time to fight. The war had only just begun, but the spark of hope that had been ignited would not be easily extinguished. The Star Destroyer was not just humanity's weapon. It was the beginning of a new era. The moment Earth had waited for had arrived. The battle raged on in the skies above Earth, and the Star Destroyer, now fully operational, was humanity's last chance to turn the tide. Dr. Reynolds and his team watched from the surface as the ancient weapon fired relentless volleys of energy toward the alien fleet. The air was thick with the sound of explosions, and the ground beneath their feet trembled from the shockwaves. The Star Destroyer's firepower had proven formidable, but it wasn't enough. The alien fleet, though damaged, was far from defeated. Each moment felt like an eternity as the alien ships regrouped, launching another wave of attacks. They had underestimated humanity's resolve, but they would not back down. Dr. Reynolds, standing at the command center with his team, felt the weight of the moment. The fate of Earth rested on the fragile shoulders of this single ship, a relic from an ancient time. "Is the power grid stable?" Dr. Reynolds asked, his voice tight with tension. Sarah, the lead engineer, nodded grimly. "It's holding, but just barely. We've only got a few more shots left before the system overloads. If we don't finish them off soon, we'll lose the Star Destroyer." It was a sobering realization. The Star Destroyer had given humanity a fighting chance, but the power it needed to operate was finite. If the alien forces didn't retreat, the weapon could burn out completely. The team knew that time was running out. "We need to do this now," Dr. Reynolds said, clenching his fists. "We don't have any more time for hesitation." With a collective breath, the team focused all their energy on guiding the Star Destroyer. They input the coordinates of the enemy's command ship, the one ship that had been directing the entire alien assault. If they could destroy it, they might cripple the entire fleet. The Star Destroyer, now fully aware of its mission, turned its massive guns toward the enemy command ship. Its weapons, still blazing with the energy of the ancient power core, locked on to the target. The screen in front of the team flickered, showing the massive alien ship in its crosshairs. "Firing sequence initiated," Sarah said, her fingers moving quickly over the controls. "Target locked. Firing in 3, 2, 1. The Star Destroyer's weapons unleashed a final devastating blast of energy. The beam shot through the atmosphere, cutting through the enemy ship's defenses like a hot knife through butter. For a moment, everything seemed to slow down as the beam made contact. The explosion was cataclysmic, an eruption of light and energy that filled the sky. The alien command ship, the heart of the invasion, was obliterated in an instant. The alien fleet, now disoriented and leaderless, faltered. Without their command ship, they struggled to maintain cohesion. The remaining ships scrambled to regroup, but it was too late. Humanity had struck a blow they couldn't recover from. The Star Destroyer, though nearly out of power, had done its job. But just as victory seemed within reach, the remaining alien forces launched a final, desperate attack. Several of their ships, damaged but still functional, aimed their weapons directly at Earth. The planet wasn't out of danger yet. Even with the command ship destroyed, the alien forces could still inflict devastating damage. Dr. Reynolds watched in horror as the alien ships targeted Earth, their weapons charged for a final assault. The Star Destroyer was spent, its energy reserves nearly depleted. The weapon had done all it could, and yet the battle was not over. In that moment, something unexpected happened. As if guided by instinct, the remaining human fighters, those who had been coordinating with the Star Destroyer, launched a surprise counterattack. The human ships, small and agile compared to the alien behemoths, attacked with a fury that caught the invaders off guard. Using the diversion created by the Star Destroyer's final blast, they struck with precision, taking out the remaining alien vessels one by one. The invaders, once so sure of their victory, were now retreating. The remaining alien ships scattered, fleeing into the depths of space, their will to conquer Earth shattered. As the last of the alien ships vanished into the stars, a sense of relief washed over Dr. Reynolds and his team. Earth had survived, against all odds. The Star Destroyer had done its part, and humanity had proven that even against the most advanced and ruthless forces, they could endure, fight back, and win. "We did it," Dr. Reynolds said, his voice filled with disbelief and pride. "We saved Earth." The team stood in stunned silence, each of them trying to comprehend the enormity of what had just occurred. The ancient weapon, long forgotten and buried beneath the surface, had given humanity a fighting chance, and with the help of their courage, ingenuity, and determination, they had overcome the impossible. As the smoke from the final battle cleared and the sky grew quiet once more, Earth's survival had been secured. But the victory was bittersweet. They had lost so much in the fight, and yet, in the face of destruction, humanity had proven that they were more than capable of defending their home, more than capable of wielding the power of the past to protect the future. The Star Destroyer, though now silent and still in orbit, had forever changed the course of history. It had awakened something in humanity, a determination to protect their world at all costs, no matter the odds. And as Earth's defenders looked to the stars, they knew that the fight was not over. There were still countless challenges ahead, but now they were ready. They had just begun to truly fight for the future.